Well, welcome. The reason for this presentation is because of something that happened. The year is 2023, and in April of this year, as I was watching General Conference, listening to a talk, or watching a talk given by Elder D. Todd Christofferson, I suddenly sat upright in my chair and realized he's actually making a connection. Now, why I say that is because I'm a believer in patterns, connections, themes, things like that. I want to make a case for two things. Number one, that the Hill Cumorah is the first temple of the dispensation of the fullness of times. And number two, I want to make a case for the Hill Cumorah in New York as being not only important in modern times, but has an importance that is of ancient times as well. So let's get started. In order for me to make this case, I need to gather some tools. And some of those tools are observations and patterns and things of that nature, studying the scriptures. Here is a talk given by a new general authority at the time, Elder David A. Bidnar. And he's talking about how to study the scriptures.
I now want to review with you three basic ways or methods of obtaining living water from the scriptural reservoir. 1, reading the scriptures from beginning to end. 2, studying the scriptures by topic. And 3, searching the scriptures for connections, patterns, and themes. Each of these approaches can help to satisfy our spiritual thirst if we invite the companionship and assistance of the Holy Ghost as we read, study, and search.
Okay, he talked about studying the scriptures from beginning to end and studying by topic. We've all done that, or at least I would hope we've all done that. But then he also discussed searching the scriptures for connections. It's a very powerful way the Lord quietly asks us to make connections, patterns, and themes. Now, connections. Sometimes when you see the word or the number 40, for example, it's just, a number. But other times, I feel that the Lord is asking us to pay attention. He's making a connection. He doesn't tell us the connection. He asks us to go ahead and figure that out. And if we allow the Spirit to guide us, I think we'll see the connections He's making. For example, the number 40 I used earlier. The Lord mentions the 40 days and nights of rain during the flood. Why did it rain 40 days? Why not 39? There's also 40 days and nights of Jesus' fasting and his temptations. 40-day fast that Moses had on Mount Sinai. Israel's 40-year wandering in the wilderness. Jesus tarried as the resurrected Lord for 40 days with his disciples. It took 40 years to build the Salt Lake Temple. Why did it take 40 years? Why couldn't they get it done in 38? Maybe it could have taken 45 years. Why 40? And this is curious. I wrote this down. Someone made this observation. The Utah floods of 1983 are 40 years before the floods of 2023. Is that a connection? President Nelson and President Oaks were ordained apostles in 1984. That's 40 years before the upcoming eclipse in 2024. That's just a coincidence, right? Maybe not. The number 10. There's a lot of connections. A tenth of our earnings is a tithe, right? The 10 Commandments. A Passover lamb is selected on the 10th day of the first month. On and on. There's all these tens. Jesus healed 10 lepers. Here's an interesting one that uses both 10 and 7. You see a lot of this combination, 10 being used in conjunction with 7 and vice versa. From Adam to Noah is 10 generations. But who's at the number 7 spot? Enoch. Is that a coincidence? The number 7, oh my goodness, it's used many times. For example, the rainbow is comprised of 7 colors. Peter was told by Jesus, forgive 7 times 7. Jesus healed 7 people on the 7th day. God promised to bring down the walls of Jericho if the army of Joshua marched around the city every day for 6 days. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, accompanied by 7 priests blowing 7 trumpets. I think that those are connections. And if we're wise enough to ask for the Spirit to guide us, I think we can make connections with those. Here are some other things. Now, this is Joseph Smith at the Liberty Jail during those dark, cold, miserable days and nights spent in the Liberty Jail. He received what I feel are some of his most sublime revelations. D&C 121, verse 31, is an example of one of those beautiful revelations. All of the times of their revolutions, all of the appointed days, months, and years, and all of the days of their days, months, and years, and all of their glories, laws, and set times shall be revealed in the days when? Of the millennium? No. The Lord said, in the days of the dispensation of the fullness of times. He's telling Joseph Smith that he has created a calendar for this earth. And he's put on that calendar certain appointed times, certain days, certain months. All of this earth apparently was pre-planned by the Lord. It was spiritually created before it actually came into being. There was a date that Christ was to be born. There was a date that Joseph Smith was to receive the first vision. There was a date appointed for the flood. And he's telling Joseph that all of these wonderful appointed days are going to be revealed in our day, the day in which we live. You see, when Joseph was alive, he could not remember the date of the first vision. He was only 14, and he probably didn't think to take notes of the exact date. And he didn't have a way to go back and remember when that was. Remember, this is what he could remember. He remembered the time of the year it was. It was a beautiful day. He remembers it was in early spring, and he remembered the year. And that was about all he could remember. But he's being promised by the Lord that that particular day will be revealed someday in this dispensation. So, dates are important. So as we review, we've got these patterns, connections, and themes, and topics. And so we're going to add to this calendar, appointments, days, months, years. And we've already mentioned numbers. So numbers are things we have to watch out for also. Signs in the heavens. And there are other things. But signs in the heavens. I'm a real fan of eclipses, and we'll talk about those a little later. So many people want to know where Book of Mormon lands are. And they spend a lot of money. They'll travel to what they call the Book of Mormon lands. They may want to visit the pyramid at Palenque, the Chichen Itza, Koba Pyramid, Tikal, and they'll spend thousands of dollars on these trips. They may fly into Cancun and have a wonderful experience, or they may take a cruise ship into Cozumel. They may have several of the tour companies that host tours and cruises and things like that to Book of Mormon lands. Here's a beautiful cruise that could be booked through Bountiful Travel. So let's just see if we can find that and get that to come up. Okay, that should be on there. So Book of Mormon travel, you could, from Bountiful Travel, you could take a nice cruise hosted by John By the Way, Randall Wright, Don Perry, Dave Hadlock, and have a wonderful experience. And there are other cruises. These I just found very quickly on the internet. And so many people in the church feel like this is where the Book of Mormon took place. BYU kind of leans in that direction too. This is their new virtual map that they created. Notice all the different Book of Mormon locations on there, based upon what they feel is from the evidence of the Book of Mormon. It's very similar to a less detailed version found in the seminary manual. Is there any place on earth that these could be based on? Well, I don't know. What about this place? Any similarities there? What about that way? Possibly. And it's important to know where the Hill Cumorah is. Look where the Hill Cumorah is on that particular virtual map. As we go to BYU's website, there's this map, and we're going to find it. So we go to BYU, and we go back here, and we type in Book of Mormon places. And let's see what we find. Come on. It doesn't want to find it for us. It's hung up. But we would go to those same places. There's the map that we would see at BYU's website, along with that virtual map. Both of these I got from that website. And it's curious, where do they think the Hill Cumorah is? Right here. Now, is geography, Book of Mormon geography, important? Well, many people will say, no, I don't really care where it happened. It doesn't really matter. All I know is that the Book of Mormon is true. Well, I'm here to tell you, I think it's very important. As we get going in here, you'll understand why I feel that way. Even though BYU and all of these travel tour guides and tour agencies are promoting Mesoamerica, when they start promoting the Hill Cumorah in Mesoamerica, that is a real problem.
In the western part of the state of New York near Palmyra is a prominent hill known as Hill Cumorah. On July the 25th of this year, as I stood on the crest of that hill, admiring the awe-inspiring and breathtaking panorama which stretched out before me on every hand, my mind reverted to the events which occurred in that vicinity some 25 centuries ago, events which brought to an end the great Jaredite nation.
So here I think there is a crisis of sorts. Many people are trying to say the Book of Mormon, the Hill Cumorah, is not in New York, it's somewhere else. Well, if you take the Hill Cumorah out of New York, then you have to look at Joseph and Oliver. Did they really know? Because they mentioned it multiple times that it's right there. Did they really know, or were they trying to deceive us? And if they didn't know about that, maybe they were wrong about many other things too. So there is a problem. And I am here to say I think Joseph and Oliver got it right. The Hill Cumorah, the first temple of the dispensation of the fullness of times. And as we stand on the top of Hill Cumorah and we look out over this beautiful, beautiful valley, what do we see? Well, manicured green grass, beautiful valley below the hill there in the distance. You can see a hill about a mile away. But notice all of the fixtures there prepared for the Hill Cumorah pageant. But we're here not just talking about the hill. We're talking about a land, which I call Cumorah land. In Cumorah land, I feel, and this is my personal feeling, that there are two sacred hills. One is called Hill Shem. And in Hill Shem, there were the great Nephite treasury where the Nephites and, I feel, possibly the Jaredites deposited their treasures. Also in there is another hill called the Hill Cumorah. And what was in the Hill Cumorah? In the Hill Cumorah, there was obviously Moroni's box, but there was also a grand repository of Nephite records. That's where you would find the brass plates. The brass plates didn't just disappear. They're still here. The Liahona, Laban's sword. And I feel all those great Jaredite treasures, they're not lost. They're there probably also. In this land, you've also got the final battles of both the Jaredites and the Nephites. Here are two things that refer to those repositories. The first one is a letter from Oliver Cowdery. Oliver Cowdery wrote 8 letters, and in these 8 letters are the first history of the church. He wrote these letters in his capacity as the assistant president of the church. And he wrote them with the assistance of Joseph, because he mentions in there that there are certain things I'm writing that I didn't know. Joseph had to tell me about these things. And so they were written with the Joseph's assistance. Now, this letter 7, which I'm going to refer to right now, he wrote this not only as an apostle, but also as a member of the first presidency. And recently, just about 3 months prior to him writing this letter, he had been set apart as the assistant president of the church. Not only in the first presidency, but also as the assistant president of the church. He stood next to Joseph Smith in authority. And so in this particular letter, as we go to the Joseph Smith papers to read this, okay, here Oliver is giving about a 3-paragraph description of this hill, where it's at. And he says about 1 mile west rises, and he's referring to him, he's writing as if he's standing on top of the hill. He says, about 1 mile west rises another ridge of less height, running parallel with the former, leaving a beautiful valley between. The soil is of the first quality for the country, and under a state of cultivation, which gives a prospect at once imposing. When one reflects on the fact that here between these hills, meaning the hill where he's at and the one about a mile away, between these hills the entire power and national strength of both the Jaredites and Nephites were destroyed. Come back to that word, the fact. When one reflects on the fact, how could Oliver make this statement that here is where the Nephites and the Jaredites were destroyed? Did he have a revelation? Was it an intuition? Was it some other manifestation that he could make this statement with such clarity as stating it as a fact? Okay, for example, I have on a red sweater. Did I have a revelation that I have a red sweater on? No. I'm making an observation. I know how to see, and I know I have a red sweater on. I'm not being deceived. The reason he could make that statement is because when Joseph returned the plates to the hill, Oliver went with him. How do we know that? Well, we know that from a talk given by Brigham Young. 2 months before he died, he felt a desire to reveal a personal conversation which he had with Oliver. And he said, my intent is to present this so that it will not be lost. He says that when Joseph and Oliver went to the hill, Oliver says that they walked into a cave. And in that cave, in the Hill Cumorah, were, he calls it, many wagon loads of records. So Oliver is putting 2 and 2 together here. He's saying, I know I walked into the cave, and the cave I wrote about in the Book of Mormon. And I know that if I am in the cave, then that means that Mormon was here, and this is where Mormon died, and this is where the final battles are. Okay, so now let's come back to the Book of Mormon. So here you've got Mormon saying, in Mormon chapter 6, verse 6, he says, and having been commanded of the Lord that I should not suffer the records which had been handed down by our fathers, which were sacred, to fall into the hands of the Lamanites, for the Lamanites would destroy them. Therefore I made this record, meaning the gold plates, out of the plates of Nephi. And I hid up in the Hill Cumorah all the records which had been entrusted to me by the hand of the Lord, save it were these few plates, meaning the gold plates again, which I gave unto my son Moroni. What is Mormon just telling us? He said he hid up all of the records in the Hill Cumorah. He took them from the Hill Shim, and he hid them up in the Hill Cumorah. Why did he take them from the Hill Shim? Because probably the Lamanites knew about that repository. It was probably common knowledge that that's where they were at. And so, knowing, he says, that they would fall into the hands of the Lamanites, he removed them. And he probably had his army help him build another repository. Or maybe the repository in the Hill Cumorah already existed. But irregardless, he removed them from Shem because he knew that the Lamanites would get them and destroy them. And he put them in a safe place. Now, are they still there? No. They've been moved again. That's why I think that it took 50 years before Brigham Young felt safe to talk about them. Because by now, they had been moved to a safer place. David Whitmer mentions that they're no longer there, but they're not far. So not far, wherever that is, I don't know. Maybe they put them back in the Hill Shim. Okay, so in this land of Cumorah land, not only are these sacred things there, but this is also the site of the church restoration. It's also the site of the sacred grove. These are all in Cumorah land. But many in the church do not feel that any of these elements are there. The only elements that they recognize as being part of Cumorah land are Moroni's box, the church restoration site, and the sacred grove. And I guess that's okay. These are some insights that I'm putting forth. Number 1, if the only reason for the New York Cumorah was to have Moroni bring the plates to Joseph, to where Joseph was living, well then why not take them all the way to Vermont, where Joseph was born? He was there for the first few years of his life. Why did the angel Moroni bring him to Palmyra area? Number 2, Cumorah land is an ending place. That's my contention. A place where there had been great evil in the past. A place where evil had conquered good, but not quite, as you'll see here in a minute. It was a place of contention and deception, both anciently as well as in Joseph's day. In Joseph's day, it was a place of contention and deception. Cumorah land was also a place of new beginnings. The Lord wasn't bringing Moroni to Joseph. He was bringing Joseph to Moroni and to this sacred yet troubled land, a place where the past meets the future, both for good as well as evil. A troubled land, a sacred land, a place where the past meets the future, both for good as well as evil. The church only remained in Cumorah land a few months, and then it was gone, not to return for over 80 years. It seems the Lord gave Joseph what he needed, and then he removed the young church, taking them to a safer place. Cumorah land, the birthplace of modern spiritualism. It was also the epicenter of modern socialism and evolution. But before we go into those areas, think about this for a moment. It was only there for a few months and then it was gone. Why did the Lord want the church to be removed so quickly? Well, number one, think of all of the apostles, all of the leadership of the church. How many of them ever had a chance to go to the Hill Cumorah? I don't think any of them except for Oliver and possibly David Whitmer and Joseph. Brigham Young ventured there a couple of years later, and so did Percy Kimball. But the rest of them never went to the Hill Cumorah. Remember when Willard Bean was called to be, he and his new bride, Rebecca, were called to be missionaries there. As they were set apart for their mission, Joseph F. Smith said, "You're going to be going into one of the most anti-Mormon places on the face of the earth." And they did. They went there, and they went into a very hostile environment. Even though the church was only there for a few months, there was still this hatred that existed to that very day. Let's click on this link here and go and explore that idea. Here you've got the Hill Cumorah. You've got the Smith family farm, and there between those you've got the Sacred Grove. About 10 miles away, you've got a place called Hydesville. There's a place right here. Not only is the Hill Cumorah a place of celebration, but Hydesville, what were they trying to celebrate there just in that same vicinity? There's a plaque there and a sign saying in Hydesville Park that this is the birthplace of the religion of modern spiritualism. Whoa. Modern spiritualism. Here is a New York historical marker saying the Fox sisters. On this site, events of March 31st, 1848 began Sisters Maggie and Kate Fox's central role in the origin of modern spiritualism. They were basically dealing with seances, speaking to the dead, levitation, all kinds of strange things that they were involved with. So that was going on at that time period. They called it the burned over district for a reason, because there was so much in the way of religious groups, and yet there was also this occult that was happening there. The term modern spiritualism, you've got the Ouija boards and things like that that kind of are an outgrowth of that. One LDS scholar wrote a book about Joseph's ties to magic, and this was by D. Michael Quinn, Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview. It was his contention that Joseph's translation and the seer stone was an outgrowth of this occult, and that the family dabbled in the occult, and Joseph used this stone to dig for buried treasure. All kinds of things like this were going on, but was it true? That's something you have to decide. But I don't think so. I think that Joseph Smith, yes, he lived in this time period amongst this element, and I think there was such an evil element in there that the Lord had to get the church and Joseph Smith out of there very quickly. Not only the elements of the occult in Palmyra, but there were elements of evolution that had an epicenter there. John Wesley Powell grew up there. John Wesley Powell is famous. He was the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Obviously, Lake Powell was named after him, but he taught the doctrine of manifest destiny. And in order to promote manifest destiny, the Native Americans had to be relegated to the position of almost subhuman. In other words, they didn't have the same intellect that whites did. And so it was very easy to remove native lands, which the government did. They were able to kick the Native Americans off of their sacred lands or their ancestral lands, move them to reservations because they didn't have the same rights that whites did, according to John Wesley Powell. Lewis Henry Morgan had a lot to do with socialism. Karl Marx, in his writings, wrote glowingly of his education from Lewis Henry Morgan. So both of these elements were very, very strong. The elements of evolution, the elements of socialism, and the elements of occult and spiritualism were all present in that area. So it was a very evil area. Remember, two great civilizations met their end right there. As I looked at this and I tried to make sense of this 10-year time period, I thought, okay, there's possibly a connection here. Maybe there's a 100-year connection. The first vision was in 1820. There was no church celebration for the first vision in 1920. I guess there is no 100-year connection. And then suddenly something happened as we approached the year 2020. Suddenly there was a huge connection. And as President Nelson mentioned at the beginning of 2020, that this would be a celebration year unlike any other. But he also mentioned that this would be a hinge point year, meaning a pivotal year. Looking through a lens to get a clearer picture, found that the years 1620 and 2020 are very pivotal years. I feel like these are hinge points. Obviously, 1820 is a hinge point because that's the beginning of this dispensation of the fullness of times. But I feel that 1620, the Pilgrims arrived late 1620. They could have arrived a month and a half later in 1621, but they didn't. They arrived at the tail end of 1620. And what did the Pilgrims bring to us? Well, they brought us a lot. Just one thing briefly. They brought us the concept of liberty. The first liberty document, the Mayflower Compact, was signed. 2020, I think we're going to have to wait as we look back and we see the events unfold. I think we will find out that 2020 is a year unlike any year, a very pivotal year, a hinge point year, just like 1820. And so the answer to the question, are these 3 years hinge points in the world's history? The churches? Well, you decide. I think they are. I saw no celebration, no centennial celebration in the church during these years. If there's a replication of this 10-year odyssey that happened in the 1800s, notice there's a 10-year period from 1820 to 1830, the publication date of the Book of Mormon, but also something else there, the restoration of the church. And then there's this 7-year period. And so as I started to go through this, realizing, okay, nothing happened. We know how important. We'll come back to 1820 later. But nothing happened. And then something happened very important in 1823. And what are we celebrating this year? I feel that we're going to be celebrating the bicentennial of 1823. So what was happening in 1823? Well, let's look at that for a moment. We know that on the evening of September 21st, or maybe early in the morning of September 22nd, Joseph received the first of 3 visits from the angel Moroni. And some of the things, these are listed in Joseph Smith's history and also the Joseph Smith papers. Here the angel mentioned to him something about 2 stones and silver bows, stones fastened with a breastplate, the Urim and Thummim, along with the plates. These nighttime visits continued throughout the night. And Joseph was warned that if he showed the plates, either the breastplate, the Urim and Thummim, or the plates, to any person save those to whom I should be commanded to show them, I should be destroyed. These night visits continued throughout the night. Certain things were told Joseph over and over again. This repetition was very important. But I wanted to point out here the breastplate, the Urim and Thummim, and the plates, because those were the items that Joseph found in the box. They were prepared specifically for the translation purposes, and he was not to show them to anyone. Those people that believe in the translation taking place with a seer stone, notice that Joseph wasn't under any kind of a commandment not to show the seer stone to anyone. But why was he commanded not to show the Urim and Thummim to anyone, except for those that the angel gave him permission to show them to? And he also mentioned, and this is in the Joseph Smith papers also, written and deposited. Written and deposited. What did the angel say? He, Moroni, said this history was written and deposited not far from that place, meaning Joseph's home. And here we're going to go back to the Joseph Smith papers and read it. So here's the angel speaking to Joseph. He said, it was written and deposited not far from that place, and it was our brother's privilege, if obedient to the commandments of the Lord, to obtain and translate the same by means of the Urim and Thummim, which were deposited for that purpose with the record. Pretty clear, isn't it? This is from Joseph Smith's history. Written and deposited. Who wrote the gold plates? Mormon. What happened to Mormon? He died at the Hill Cumorah. Who deposited the plates? His son Moroni. And where did Moroni deposit them? At the Hill Cumorah. And where's the Hill Cumorah? It says they were written and deposited there. Not someplace in a distant country, but there. So there's some problems that we have if we try to place the Hill Cumorah someplace else, which so many people are trying to do. So this account that I just gave you, this is part of those 8 letters that Oliver Cowdery wrote that are being discounted. Remember, he wrote them by authority. He wrote them, I think, by assignment. The next day, the angel appeared to him again. Adding to the 3 night visits was an additional daytime visit in which the messenger repeated all that was said the night before. So why the repetition? The messenger seemed to know that Joseph would need the support of his family during the 4 years of preparation. I'm sticking this part in here because I think it's an intimate story about Joseph and his family's relationship. A lot of the people that told stories about the Smith family talked about them being indolent and lazy, and that his father was a drunkard. This is from Lucy Mack Smith's history. And I think this is very important. So let's go find that in the Joseph Smith papers too. This is from Lucy Mack Smith. He says, now Joseph, beware, or when you get to the plates, your mind will be filled with darkness, and all manner of evil will rush into your mind, to prevent you from keeping the commandments of God, that you may not succeed in doing his work. And you must tell your father of this, for he will believe every word you say. The record is on the side of a hill on the Hill of Cumorah, 3 miles from this place. You must tell your father of this, for he will believe every word. That tells me so much about the relationship that the family had. And his mother remembering this as she writes her history. And then she also mentions this. that he was to find the plates at a hill. And notice that she even names the hill. Is that important? Now, there was a wonderful series of histories written called Saints. Here in this particular reference we just read, Lucy uses the name the Hill Cumorah as she recounts Moroni's first visits. Lucy is used as a credible witness over 100 times in Volume 1 of that series. But somehow left this important story out. Why? I think it's a powerful story. Why would they leave that story out? So look at it again. You must tell your father of this, for he will believe every word you say. The record is on the side of a hill called Cumorah. So later on that day, Joseph uncovered the plates. And once again, what did he say was in the box? He said that he beheld the plates, the Urim and Thummim, and the breastplate. That's it. That was all that was in the box. Because that was all that was needed. There wasn't extraneous stuff in the box. There was just those three elements. And here Moroni paid a fifth visit, giving additional instructions. Joseph was commanded to return each year on this same date for 4 more years, and for even more instruction. What was the date? September 22nd. Every year he was to return. 1823, we're now at the bicentennial year celebration. I feel there will be a celebration, even though at this point in time of this presentation, there hasn't been anything said about a bicentennial celebration. But remember, there was a bicentennial celebration in 2020 for the first vision. I'm just guessing that there will be one. I could be wrong. We go here to, this is the Hill Cumorah as it looked in 1923. Was there a celebration? That's the subject of part 2.